Hello everyone, my name is Krista Dilova and I'm the director of the Morpho Institute. Pleased to welcome you tonight to our Amazon Conservation Through Education webinar series hosted on the first Thursday of every month, except for the summer months when we're out doing field work in the Amazon. Tonight we are just thrilled to be joined by Dr. Alexandra Moore from the Paleontological Research Institute in Ithaca, New York for a very thoughtful discussion on the co-benefits of planting trees. But first, just a brief introduction to Dr. Moore. She's a senior education specialist for the PRI Institute in Ithaca. She specializes in science education with emphasis on student-centered learning, virtual and actual fieldwork, and geospatial analysis. She blends her special interests in climate neutral curricula, service learning, and community partnerships, and the integration of science and cultural studies. She's been leading field programming for students through Cornell's Earth and Environmental Systems field programs in Hawaii for many, many years. Tonight, we're just delighted to have her as a guest speaker, and she'll lead us through a thoughtful discussion on the big impact of the seemingly simple act of planting a tree and how every aspect of a tree's life cycle, from biophysics to climate impacts to cultural significance, can become a learning opportunity. Alex will share some of the experiences that she's had with her students in planting trees both in tropical and temperate ecosystems, the things they've learned along the way, and why they can give us hope. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Nancy Troutman, who's on our board at the Morpho Institute, for just a few words, and then we'll get going with Alex. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm basically going to let Alex introduce herself, but Dr. Alex Moore has been a friend of mine for decades. She does science education work we work together at Cornell University, and now she's with Paleontological Research Institute. And I particularly think her work intersects with ours because she's so interested in the intersection between science and culture. And with that, Alex, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. It is my pleasure. I'm pretty excited to talk with you folks about the co-benefits of planting trees. And I'm going to do this in 3 parts. The first part is going to be some backstory and some precursor information. The middle part is going to be actually about planting trees. And then the third part is where I'm going to really bust out the co-benefits, and we'll talk about all of the things that I've learned. But I'm going to begin first by talking about myself. Hello, there we are. So here's my resume. I went to college in California not knowing what I wanted to study, but discovered geology and was super excited about that because I found out that I could get paid to go camping and hiking in the mountains for the rest of my life. And this sounded like a really good deal. So I pursued that. And then when I graduated, I went on to graduate school and actually did my PhD research in Peru. Although about as far away from where y'all go as is possible to get. I worked up on the Altiplano near Lago Titicaca, studying the origin of the Andes as a mountain range and as a tectonic feature on the Earth's surface. After that, I got an academic position. I have taught both at a small liberal arts college and at Cornell University. And recently, I stepped sideways into informal education, working with the Paleontological Research Institution that runs both the Museum of the Earth and the Cayuga Nature Center in Ithaca, New York. I have a husband, I have 2 daughters, and my husband's work is kind of similar to mine. And that's been fortunate for us because we've been able to travel all over the world and take our 2 girls with us all over the world. And that's been exciting and fun. And one of the places that we spent an awful lot of time is the Hawaiian Islands. And if you're like me and your little images of people cover the upper right part of your screen, move them for just a minute so that you can see the photo there of my daughter and me playing with lava flows. That's one of the things that first brought me to Hawaii. But what I discovered when I got there was so much more to see and to do. And so this presentation is going to talk about some of those things. And I hope that this slide kind of makes you think of the game Candyland and the crazy windy path that you take on your quest, because this presentation is going to be sort of a crazy, windy story about some stuff that happened to me when I went to Hawaii. And that story is going to begin in 2008, when I was at a meeting of the Geological Society of America, and I was listening to a keynote address by Jim Hansen, who's a NASA climate scientist. And he was talking about tipping points in the Earth's climate system. And at that time, in 2008, he was saying we were fast approaching an irreversible tipping point, and everybody needed to get up off their butts and get going and get moving and do something to make change. And I'm sitting there listening to this thinking, I run a field program in the Hawaiian Islands where we fly people halfway around the world and call it an environmental semester, a sustainability program. And that really didn't sound very sustainable to me. So sitting there in that auditorium, I said to myself, you know what? We need to make this program carbon neutral. And so I set out to figure out how you could do that. So yeah, good question. How do you make a travel-based field program carbon neutral? Well, I think there are three parts to that. First, you define your carbon footprint. What elements of the emissions that we're responsible for are we actually going to take responsibility for and say, yeah, those are ours, but then there are other things that are going to belong to somebody else. So defining that footprint is sort of the first aspect of this. Once we've done that, then we need to think about what kind of emissions can we reduce? Because of course, the smaller the problem, the easier it is to solve. And finally, once we've done that, whatever we can't reduce, we're going to have to offset somehow. And so because I'm a teacher, the first thing I did was turn to my students and say, all right, this is your problem. You've got to figure this out. But also because I'm a teacher, I had some stuff in my back pocket that I knew we were going to do. And one of those things was I had already investigated the possibility of planting trees as our carbon offset strategy. But I did, in fact, hand this off to the students. And the discussions that they had were absolutely fascinating. They were wide-ranging, they were crazy, they were inspired. They went on and on and on, and sometimes I thought we would never come to an agreement, but eventually we did. And we defined a carbon footprint that was comprised of 6 different elements. So those were air travel, obviously, because if we're flying around, there are going to be a lot of emissions related to that. The vehicle emissions, once we get to the Hawaiian Islands, we have to drive to all these different field sites where we're working. And so there's carbon emissions associated with that. Electricity in our program house, hot water, which was partly solar, but also partly propane. Notice that there's no domestic heat on this list because we're in Hawaii. This house doesn't have heat, even though sometimes that would be nice. Also food, everything we eat and the footprint associated with that. And then finally, waste. And so we began to brainstorm what kind of things can we do to reduce this carbon footprint. One of the fun things we did was we joined a CSA. We reduced, reused, recycle, take short showers, turn off the lights, carpool, all the things that you can think of. And then we had to actually try to quantify what that carbon footprint actually was. And so, for example, with waste, every time a bag of trash went out the door, it got weighed. And we were very aggressive about separating out recyclables from rubbish, from compost. And one of the kind of cool things here, if you look at this, excuse me, pie graph, it turns out that by composting and recycling, only 15% of the waste that we generated as a household of 20 people actually ended up going to the landfill. And that was really cool because particularly when you're on an island, there's no place to put the trash. And indeed on Hawaii Island where we were living, there are 2 landfills. One of them is completely maxed out. And so you can think of these really finite boundaries on an island really kind of get your head focused on what we need to do as a human species on a finite planet. So that was really, really interesting. And already, without even planting a tree, here's a co-benefit of planting a tree. We are very aggressive about reducing our waste. So that was really interesting. So we tabulated everything. You know, the kids added up all the air miles that they flew. I'm holding all the receipts for every gallon of gas we ever bought. We know we read the electric meter, as my student Sally is doing right here, counted the propane that we used. And so you can see over 5 years for a semester length field program, it's about 100 people. We flew 1.2 million air miles, burned 5,600 gallons of gas, used 30,000 kilowatt hours of electricity, 390 gallons of propane, ate 40,000 meals, and generated 9,300 pounds of trash. Now, turning these numbers into carbon dioxide is, for some of them, pretty straightforward. For example, a gallon of gas is 9 kilograms of carbon dioxide. That's just a chemistry problem. And so that was fairly simple to do. Other things like food and waste, we looked at some online carbon calculators to help us figure out what our carbon footprint would be there. And here's how that turned out. So no surprise at all, air travel is the biggest piece of our carbon footprint at 200 tons of carbon dioxide. The big surprise was what the second largest piece was. Who knew that food had such a big carbon footprint? But I actually really like that because, for instance, if you're going to go to Hawaii, you have to fly. There's no alternative. And I've looked, there's no alternative. And if you're going to do field work, you've got to get to your field sites, and driving is about the only way to get there. But food is completely under our control. I mean, yeah, we've got to eat, but we can decide what we eat and how we eat. And so this was a really interesting result. Okay, so you can imagine that if we have over 5 years, we've got about 350 metric tons of carbon dioxide. That's about 70 tons per year that we're going to have to offset. And having already decided that we were going to do this by planting trees, we turned to allometric equations to figure out how that was going to work. So allometry is the principle of looking at a part of an organism and its relationship to the whole thing. So in the case of looking at the biomass of trees, foresters have developed these allometric equations that allow you to measure the diameter and the height of the tree and determine what the biomass is. Sometimes you can just measure the diameter of the tree. You don't even need to go to height. And people have done this over decades all over the world. And so we've got a paper here with allometric equations for tropical trees. And I work with two populations of students in Hawaii. One of them are these undergraduates who I've been bringing, actually, gosh, out there for 30 years now. Sometimes for shorter programs, like 3 or 4 weeks, but for 12 years, we ran this semester length environmental field program. And so when I work with fancy East Coast undergraduates, they can handle this math and that's fine. But the second group of students that I work with are public school middle students who live in Hawaii, who are local kids. And for them, this isn't going to cut it. So I had to make it a lot more user-friendly because they were interested too in the biomass of trees and the carbon offset capacity of a tree. And so what I did was I turned these equations into curves they could just use off of a graph like this. And I've calibrated them for common trees, endemic species that they'll see in Hawaii that are often used in landscape restoration projects. So so you can go either way. And I think some of you may have some experience with this already, with either using curves like this or using tables to calculate biomass. And then from biomass, just getting to carbon or carbon dioxide in the tree is simple. We know what the chemistry of wood is, and we can do that calculation and change whatever's on the vertical axis there. And in fact, if you're interested in temperate trees. I've done it for temperate species as well, so that we can use them around here in Ithaca. Okay, so we're going to have to plant a bunch of trees. And how exactly are we going to do that? In order to offset 70 tons of CO2 every year, we're going to need to plant more than one tree. And so that means we are probably going to have to partner with somebody local to do this, because you can't, obviously you can't just march out and start planting trees. You've got to do this in a way that makes sense. You've got to think about what kind of trees you want to plant, where you're going to plant them, how you're going to plant them. And so, for instance, this is an example of two different ways that people grow trees. On the left, we've got, this is a eucalyptus plantation. And you can see that all the trees are growing in little rows. Every one of those trees is a clone of every one of its neighbors. There's zero biodiversity here. In fact, look at the forest floor. There's nothing even growing on there. There's no bugs, there's no birds, because of the eucalyptus oil repels everything. So this really wasn't what we wanted to do. Over on the right, this is a native Hawaiian forest. You can see that it's much more diverse. And it seemed to me that this was the way we wanted to go with our trees. So we had to find some partners to help us do that. Now, oh, this is the landscape I showed you in the title slide. When we're talking about the co-benefits of planting trees, you can probably appreciate that this landscape itself would benefit from having some trees on it. This is a former forest that was cleared to run cattle. And this is what the cattle did to that landscape. And right now it's a restoration site. So we joined with some restoration partners, and there's sort of two really important things to think about in this case. Obviously, we need to make sure that whatever we're doing is environmentally appropriate. Hawaii has an enormous, well, because Hawaii is so isolated, the things that live there now are highly endemic. The rate of endemism is quite high. So the things that live there live no place else. They're incredibly special. Because they are, there's also a serious invasive species problem, because things that get transported there either on purpose or by accident tend to trample the native species that aren't, that didn't evolve in an environment of competition with a lot of other things. There's also a really large endangered species problem, because for the same reason I just gave. So we need to be careful. We want to make sure that whatever we do doesn't do more harm than good. Yes. And then we also need to think about our actions in a culturally appropriate way, because this is the homeland of Hawaiian people, and they are still there, and they are still vibrant and enthusiastic and very much connected to their ancestral land. So we need to make sure that we satisfy those two criteria when we go out in the field. So we partnered with conservation groups, and my original idea was, yeah, we'll plant some trees, but turns out that what you really want to do is plant the whole ecosystem. So that means planting trees, planting shrubs, planting vines, everything that's going to recreate this climax forest that used to be there. And so when we got involved with these conservation partners, oh my goodness, did we get schooled. We were naive, but we were enthusiastic and willing to learn. And what I learned was that the process of forest restoration begins well before you put a single tree into the ground. For instance, as I said, Hawaiian species are highly endemic, and you can't just mail order them. So if you're going to plant trees, the first thing you have to do is go out into the field and gather the seeds. And once you've got those seeds, you can propagate them. And we did this for years and years. We propagated thousands of little seedlings for some of our conservation partners because it was so much fun to do. This is Jen, who is one of the land managers, and we filled the back of her truck with little seedlings of Erythrina sandwicensis, which is an endemic dry forest tree species. And later on, we're going to get to plant those. But first, you got to make sure that all the invasive species are out of the area that you're trying to restore. And once you remove the invasives, you're going to have to fence that space, which is human resource intensive and cash intensive. If you're in a dry forest situation, you probably are going to have to install some irrigation line to make sure that your seedlings have the best chance possible to grow and thrive and survive. And in fact, when we were calculating what the sequestration capacity, carbon sequestration capacity of these trees was going to be, we actually made some assumptions about mortality. We assumed that 25% of them were going to die. And when we thought about how much CO2 they were going to sequester, we decided to do this in a time-independent fashion. So we weren't going to try to figure out how much they were sequestering every year. We said they're going to mature in about 20 years, and at maturity, they'll have a certain sequestration capacity. And we thought that was an appropriate timeline because that's roughly the residence time for carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So that's our protocol. We're looking at how much CO2 these trees and plants are going to hold when they're mature. So we want to give them the best start possible by laying out some irrigation line, by fencing them, by removing the invasives. And once you've done all that, you get to plant trees. And this was the point at which I'm going to say everything changed. I felt kind of like Alice in Wonderland, because we stepped through this doorway into a place that we never expected to be. And not just this beautiful music forest that you're looking here, but an intellectual place, a spiritual place, just an absolutely amazing space that we had not imagined, could not have imagined prior to getting involved. So here you're looking at a native mesic forest where it actually rains. A lot of Hawaii is dryland forest where it doesn't much rain. Oh, and this is the erythrina tree. This is the adult that truck was full of little babies a few slides ago. So here's where the co-benefits really begin to appear. So once you get out into this landscape and start returning the native species to this space, you've done some amazing things. First of all, you've made it beautiful, and that's a co-benefit, all right? But we've also restored habitat for native birds. Here's a apapane, which is a native endemic honey creeper, having breakfast on this beautiful Metrosideros polymorpha tree. It's a nectivore, and it's evolved. These two organisms evolved together, so they're in some ways codependent. So we're reestablishing this ecosystem, and we're reestablishing all of the ecosystem services that come with a fully functioning native forest ecosystem. And just so you kind of appreciate what we're up against, these are two maps of the Big Island of Hawaii where we lived for 12 years. And on the left, you're looking at the ecosystem types that were there prior to the arrival of humans. So in green, you've got different elevation wet forest ecosystems. In shades of yellow, you've got different elevation dry forest ecosystems. At high elevation, you've got alpine ecosystems. And so that's on the left. On the right, everything in pink is what's been damaged by humans. And so you can see the extent of land use change is enormous. And so that's what we're taking a look at here. Because we have all these endemic species, because we have this vast disturbance, we have in Hawaii an enormous number of endangered species. If you look at the federally listed endangered species in the US, 30% of those are in Hawaii, in one state, in one tiny state. So it is one of the endangered species hotspots on planet Earth. And we were incredibly privileged to be able to help restore some of these endangered species. And this is one of them that you're looking at here. This is Isodendron pyrifolium, called alpaca locally. It's got these beautiful green tubular flowers. Again, this is a coevolution with the birds that would pollinate this plant. And hi guys, oh, there we are. And at the time that I took this photograph, there were 2 mature wild alpaca on Earth, and this is one of them. And this is my student, Mary. She's over here on the right, and she's working with the conservation crew. And what they're doing is they're putting little tiny mesh bags over every single flower, so that when that flower sets seed, they're going to capture every single seed and then propagate and outplant that. And fortunately, they did that because those 2 mature plants are now dead, including this one. And so this species exists on Earth because of the work of these people and their dedication to this painstaking process of saving this species. If we look at a landscape scale, what's going on in Hawaii once the vegetation has been removed, in addition to habitat loss and biodiversity reduction and the threat of extinction, there are cultural impacts that are going to come into play here. And I'm going to actually circle around to those in just a little bit. But also, we have this really lovely Hawaiian saying, "Hahai no ka ua I ka ulu la'au," the rain follows the forest. When we have a vegetated landscape, that landscape is holding a whole lot more moisture than this denuded landscape that you're seeing in the upper right-hand corner here. Because the precipitation runs right off, we've got aridification, we've got enhanced threat of wildfire, obviously enhanced erosion if there's nothing holding the soil down. You know, all of those surface materials can very easily be stripped away. And so you have this snowball effect that exacerbates the problem. And particularly when you're on an island and when you're on a small island, like even like the big island of Hawaii, whatever happens on the mountain, on the land surface, immediately ends up in the ocean. And so all of these beautiful nearshore marine ecosystems, reef ecosystems that are the foundation of the marine food web and that are economically important, they're going to be immediately impacted if we have adverse processes on the land. So it's really important that the terrestrial landscape stay on the terrestrial landscape and not end up in the ocean. So again, here's another co-benefit of revegetating this this heavily impacted landscape is not only are we protecting the forest and the terrestrial species, we're protecting the marine species as well. One of the ways that tropical plants help retain water in that landscape is that many tropical tree species have leaves that are pointed downward. And you see an example of this in the lower right. So when they intercept clouds and fog, they drip down into the soil right underneath them. And so this is a really effective way of helping to keep some of that moisture into that landscape, to keep the soil moist and to make sure that the groundwater table stays where it's supposed to be. So here we've got a whole bunch of ecosystem services that forests provide and that we are enhancing and strengthening by adding trees to this ecosystem. So we're sheltering native plants, birds, insects. We're retaining water in that watershed. Mauka and makai are the Hawaiian words. Mauka means up on the mountain. Makai means down by the shore. So we're keeping the water, both Mauka and makai, in the soil and in the groundwater. And we're helping to prevent erosion. Of course, we're sequestering carbon dioxide from the atmosphere by increasing the biomass. And for every single one of these ecosystem services, there's a learning opportunity for students. And that's what I really like best about this. Every single parameter that I've listed on this slide is something that a student could measure and monitor. And that in itself is a co-benefit of planting these trees. I'll just show you an example from a very different place. These are photographs that my daughter in college provided me from a class that she took this semester. They are up on Pikes Peak here, looking in 3 dimensions at how this little clump of trees modifies the environment around them. You can see from the asymmetry of the trees that there's a very strong prevailing wind, and they've got these instrument masts on 4 sides of them, looking at temperature, humidity, and wind speed, and how the trees actually change the environment around them. They also went out to Western Colorado and looked at some fruit farms, and they actually flew little drones equipped with infrared cameras over the orchards and looked at the changes in temperature and moisture in the canopy of the fruit trees, and then in the bare ground adjacent. And you can see that there's a very strong cooling effect in the trees themselves, as opposed to the spaces between them. You probably can't read the scale on this, but that's about a 10-degree difference, 10 degrees Celsius from the dark blue to the green on that infrared image. So trees cool their environment, and that's another important co-benefit, particularly when we're talking about urban environments. Okay. On the scale of an individual tree, we can do projects with students, either a one-time project measuring, with simple tools like rulers. You don't need to get infrared equipped drones to do this. They can either go measure environmental parameters just once, or they can monitor it over a period of days, months, years. And so, for example, if you have a little lab carbon dioxide meter, it's really easy to measure the carbon dioxide flux from the leaves of a single plant, or underneath a tree, you can measure the soil respiration flux of CO2. And I love doing this because, you look at trees and you think they're not really doing very much, but in fact, they're doing a ton of work. They are fluxing so much CO2 in and out of their close environment on a daily basis. And I think this is one of the really neat and astonishing results of monitoring the activity of trees as they photosynthesize. And so anytime you've got kids out measuring and doing something, of course, we're working on their numeracy skills. And this photograph is of middle schoolers. This is their math class. And they had been out and had planted trees the year before. They had just gone out again and remeasured their trees. And you can see that they're graphing the change in the height and diameter of the trees that they planted. Okay. Oh, all right. And so if you are afraid that trees don't grow fast enough to see any change, let me try to persuade you otherwise. Now, yes, I'm working in the tropics and the growing season is 12 months, but even in temperate ecosystems, you can see changes. But let's take a look at these tropical trees. On the left, you can see a graph of height and diameter. This is the typical outplant size, a couple centimeters stem diameter, and about a ½ meter tall, right? These are little tiny seedlings. Year 2, they have doubled their diameter and their height. Year 3, they get bigger. Year 4, we like to bring in some social math because we measure everything in metric units and not everybody's familiar with that. So if you can stack up 2 kids and say, yeah, that's what 3 meters looks like, that can be helpful. This is 8 years out. This is actually one of our teachers, our middle school teachers, they're measuring, and you can see they're starting to look like trees, right? And here's 9 years out. That's one of the trees that I planted as a little tiny seedling. And after 9 years, this is what it has become. So, there are pretty dramatic changes in this landscape, and dramatic changes in the people that planted these trees too. And that's one of the other really unexpected co-benefits of this project. When we started collaborating with these conservation partners, we met the most dedicated, inspiring people who I know on this earth. And so that was just absolutely unexpected joy. And beyond that, many of them are Native Hawaiian, and they are cultural practitioners. So they're working in the forest, not just for the forest itself, but because this is part of their culture and their heritage. And so we began learning a lot about traditional ecological knowledge. And that was fantastic, because if we can bring these two pieces together, if we can take the tools that we use as Western trained scientists and match those up with these traditional skills and knowledge, now we've doubled our understanding of these ecosystems. And we've learned this whole new language that allows us to describe what's going on. So I'm gonna take kind of a deep dive here into traditional ecological knowledge. This is, well, probably the most spectacular example I can think of is the revival of Polynesian voyaging traditions and the circumnavigation of the globe by this voyaging canoe, Hokulea, who left Honolulu in 2014, sailed all the way around the world with no modern instrumentation whatsoever, and safely returned home in 2017. The canoe is the canoe and the sails, the hull and the sails are modern materials. Everything else is traditional. These are all the traditional woods that would have grown, that still grow in the Hawaiian Islands. They're used to outfit the canoe. So that's a very high profile, big deal project, but most traditional ecological knowledge is much more profoundly local. TEK is the indigenous cultural wisdom that describes the interconnected and sustainable use of the landscape and its human inhabitants. It's accrued over generations, it's passed down through oral tradition, through stories, songs, dance, and it evolves over time. And to give you an example of that, I'm gonna invite you to 8th grade graduation. And we're gonna take a look at some things that these kids learned as they were going through middle school. Pretty much every school in Hawaii that I've worked with has traditional ecological knowledge as part of its curriculum, and some of them substantially so. The students almost always go out to do forest restoration projects. They've been out learning to identify and quantify the different elements of their forest. But one of the other things that they've also learned is how to dance those ecosystems. And I'm going to show you a little bit of a performance that these students did at their graduation. It's a dance that describes the different ecosystems at different elevations on the mountain where their school is located. It talks about the plants that grow at high elevation and what they're used for in traditional Hawaiian communities. It talks about the things that grow in the mid-elevation uplands and what they are used for. And then it also talks about the plants that grow down at low elevation near the coast and how those are used. I wish I could show you the whole class. They're beautiful, but because these are kids and privacy, I'm going to focus on one dancer who knows that I'm doing this and I have her permission. And I'm also not going to subject you to the whole thing. We're just going to look at the part about the coast. And so when I play the video clip, listen to the chanter and listen to her call out to the kahakai, the sea, and to the niu, the coconut tree. And of course, because this is a hula, watch the dancer's hands and see if you can see that ecosystem in this dance. right, did you see it? Could you see the ocean and the coconut trees? So for me, I actually was introduced to this dance some years before this particular performance. And when I first saw it, my jaw hit the floor, because all the things I love in the forest, all these beautiful trees and the different ecosystems that I know by their scientific names, I watched these people dance. They danced the ecosystem. It was just so amazing. And I think that certainly for me and for these students too, I believe being able to learn about these ecosystems from two different but complementary ways with different languages and completely different epistemologies, I think it deepens their understanding. And I think it brings so much more power and actually beauty to their learning. So these stories, whether they're told as chant or dance or as stories, are really important. They're what keep these traditions being passed along, both in pre-contact Hawaii and even now, although a lot of these traditions have been lost because of the history of colonization of the Hawaiian Islands. And I want to share with you another story, and this one is going to be told by my friend and colleague, Ku'ule Keakealani. And she's a storyteller, and she's a collector and curator of stories. And she's going to share, she's going to start this story, and I'm going to finish it. But she's going to tell you about some place names and the importance of those place names. So let me.
But the story is going to say that here we are in lovely Kaupulehu in the upland forest, the dry land forest here in Kaupulehu, but 2 ahupua'a over in the lands of Pu'uanahulu, traditionally known as a place called Napu'u Pu'alu Kinikini, Napu'u for short, Napu'u Pu'alu, this place of multitudinous folding hills. There resided a man whose name was Hakau. And it says that Hakau is going to go seeking a wahine, a wife. And interesting enough, he goes out to the Hamakua district, right over Kohala and into Hamakua, to seek a maiden as his wife. So it says at a village above Waipi'o Valley, he comes upon a Kauhale, this ancient village. Does indeed find an attraction to a woman there, and he proposes pretty much immediately. Shall you be my wife? And the story says that the maiden, native to this village above Waipi'o, asks him but one question. If I become your wife and I return with you to your homelands, do you have kukui trees there? Do they grow in abundance in your homelands?
Okay, so kukui trees and these two individuals and their villages. Let me show you on a map what she's talking about. We're sitting here on the west side of Hawaii Island, and the man Hakau is from this place called Kukui Hakau, and it's a dry. I'll show you in a sec what it looks like. The woman is from over here. She's from Kukui Haile, and this is the green wet side of the island where these kukui trees grow. And let's just take a look at that. This is what it looks like on the ground. Okay, on the left, Kukui Haile, and these are the kukui trees that she was so fond of. On the right, we've got the place where Hakau was living, Kukui Hakau. And it's kind of curious that these two villages have this same element in their name, the name of the kukui tree, Kukui Haile. It makes sense because, yeah, look at all those kukui trees. But Kukui Hakau, there aren't any trees there. And in fact, there's no written record of there ever having been kukui trees in Kukui Hakau. But the story continues to say that he agreed to plant these trees there to please his new wife so that she would be happy living with him in Kukui Hakau. Now, maybe that's just a story, but interestingly, this is one of the places where we plant trees, and it's the conservation crew that was working there was actually getting ready for our students to come visit. And so they were doing some site prep. and they were sort of scruffling around in the dirt, and they found the shells of kukui nuts in the soil. And this is the first time anybody had ever seen any evidence that kukui trees have grown in this place. And so they were curious about when the trees might have been there. And we were talking about it, and we said, well, you know, we can take those and we can do a accelerator mass spectrometry on those and get a carbon-14 date for you. And so we did that. We took the shells to the Woods Hole lab in Massachusetts and ran them for C14. And here's what we got. So we did 5 samples. The bottom one here, the soil organic carbon, that just gives us a date on the substrate. But then we did a charcoal sample and then 3 shells from 2 different levels within this soil pit. And the numbers of interest are over here, the common era dates. So I've got you guys covering the bottom. So, oh, right. Okay. So the substrate's 2,400 years. The charcoal is from the year 950. We've got 2 shells from 1715 and 1 from 1795. And let me give you some context here. I don't get to give you context. Okay. So the Hawaiian Islands were colonized around the year 900. And so that charcoal sample is consistent with human habitation. Hakau is actually a historical figure. He was a chief, and from genealogy, we can backtrack to when we know that he was ruling, and that was in the early 1600s. So when we saw these dates of 715, again, my chin hit the floor, because if this story is true and Hakau planted trees in the early 1600s to please his wife, 100 years later, they would be mature and dropping kukui nuts into the soil. Other dates of interest, Europeans show up in the Hawaiian Islands in 1778. Missionaries taught the Hawaiians to read and write. Previously, they had been an oral tradition society. And once they knew how to read and write, they started recording all of these stories. Unfortunately, most of those have been lost because the Hawaiian language was nearly extinguished, particularly following the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy in 1893. So when Ku'ulei saw these dates, she said to me, you know, I don't need those dates to know that these stories are history. But she also knows that this data and having this information is going to elevate her voice and extend her reach when she talks about oral traditions as actual histories. Also, these stories of place point to really important aspects of landscape change and human landscape interactions, and to the idea that Hawaiians hold, which is that landscape is culture. And so this synergy between science and culture can really help change the perspectives from each vantage point. And if we have these multiple voices, stakeholders, different points of view, we're diversifying and we're strengthening those 2 different communities. So this idea that landscape is culture is really important, particularly when we've got these middle schoolers who are of this place, were born in this place, and when they go out and restore this landscape, they're helping to restore their culture too. Working with kids from the mainland, there are similar benefits. And in fact, I think anytime you do something with students, your benefits multiply by the number of students that you're working with. And I think one of the really important things that comes from this project is that these kids that we've worked with had an opportunity to do something at which they were successful. And what does success look like? Well, here are 2 photographs. Upper right, you've got this same landscape that we started with in 2010. 2 years later, it looked pretty different. And same thing, if we go up the hill just a little bit more, here's another one of our restoration sites, upper right in 2012, before restoration, and lower left in 2017. That landscape has been substantially transformed. And so that is super cool. Here's another Hawaiian expression that I really like. Li'i ka ohiki loloa ka lua. It means the sand crab is small, its burrow is large. think of it as a metaphor. And to expand on that metaphor, I'm going to use one of the neat features of Google Earth, which is its timeline. Here are satellite images of 2 of our restoration areas that our middle schoolers have worked in. And this is what they look like prior to restoration. This is what they look like now, or recently anyway. Trees, right? Toggle. No trees, trees. Woohoo. So Loloa Kalua. How cool is it that these middle schoolers know that by the time they graduate high school, the work of their hands is going to be visible from space? So we've been talking a lot about growth. We've talked about organic growth. We've talked about how we can quantify that growth, how it's transformative, how it's empowering. It's also professional. These kids need to know that taking care of the world is actually a career path that they might pursue. And for me, this is actually quite personal too. That's my younger daughter sitting in that beautiful Erythrina sandivocensis tree. That's when she was 7 years old. This is earlier this year. And here we are still standing under that very same tree. And it looks like she's on her path to pursuing this as a profession. So that's pretty cool. And you may think that after all this time, I had forgotten that I got into this story telling you about my carbon footprint and the fact that we were going to try to offset the footprint of 100 people flying back and forth to Hawaii. And you may be wondering if we ever managed to do it. The answer is yes. So on this graph, the little pink pie chart there is that 350 tons of carbon dioxide that was our footprint, plotted to scale on the sequestration capacity of the 3,800 native plants, endemic, endangered, and indigenous species that we outplanted. So trees suck a lot of CO2 out of the atmosphere. And I'm going to close with some of the thoughts of my college students who have done this work over 10 years. And you can read their comments faster than I can read them to you, but they really enjoyed putting their energy into the earth instead of taking it out. They thought about the how of small scale change, the tangible differences that individuals make, the why, the pride, the importance, the value of taking responsibility for practicing what we preach, and their ability to repair the tragedy of the commons. When you're thrown out of the lecture hall, you see why you know things, how you should use your knowledge. Your education takes on a greater meaning. It becomes, instead of graduation being the goal, graduation and your diploma are the tool and the permission and the inspiration to accomplish great things. And when you first saw the title of this talk, you probably didn't imagine that the inspiration to accomplish great things was going to be one of the co-benefits of planting trees, but it is, and I'm really glad that it is. And with that, I'll say mahalo for listening.
I may be crying a little bit. I'm just going to say that right now. Thank you.
I'm glad.
This was incredibly powerful. We are a rather small group, so please, questions, comments, feel free to unmute.
Yeah, unmute and go nuts. And I've got one more slide, which is, I call this my Times Square slide. These are all the ads for things that PRI does. And you can use the QR codes to catch all of our resources about climate change and energy. Please follow me on YouTube, make my videos go viral. I do a series of videos about climate change activities that you can do with students. We've got a cool talk coming up with Katie Worth, and so on and so forth. So, questions?
I'll make sure that everybody has the recording and links to all of this too.
Do you want me to stop sharing screen so we can look at each other?
Sure.
Let's do
Great.
that. Right. Snag all those QR codes.
Will do.
All right.
So Debbie, go ahead and make your comment if you don't mind. Just unmute and tell Alex a little bit more about where you are and what you're doing.
Sure. Well, right now I'm making cookies as I watch this. But I co-teach a class at Haskell Indian Nations University in Lawrence, Kansas. And I see one of my students made it. I offered them extra credit for attending. But I really think this is something it's a good wrap up to our ecology class. You tied in so many of the factors that we learned about during class, and especially the indigenous knowledge, the traditional knowledge, I think would be a really good focus for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, in Hawaii, it's obvious, it's evident, it's everywhere, but everywhere we live, there is traditional ecological knowledge. You may just have to work a little harder to get to it.
Yep. And our university has tribes from all over the US. And I don't know if there's no one from Hawaii in my class right now, but this is definitely ties in with what we do.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So thanks.
Cool.
So feel free to jump in, everybody. Alex, I have a question. Like, I'm a former middle school teacher, and I love the idea that you were out there with college students for a whole semester. How did that work with your collaboration with the middle school students? How much of this happened in real time while you were there with your undergraduates, and how much of it happened when you were not there? What did that partnership look like?
So the middle schoolers did this stuff all the time. Mm-hmm. And then when our kids would come out, we would, you know, schedule, I don't know what, play dates, let's call it, you know, where our kids would work together. And we actually worked with even very small children, with preschoolers, which was really pretty fun too. But that sort of intergenerational exchange was really cool, because my kids were really nice role models for students who might not have thought about college, actually. And then these kids who are from this place know a ton of stuff that they can share with my kids from outside. And so there was a lot of sort of back and forth that would go on. One of the groups that we worked with was from a Hawaiian language immersion school. And so that means that every time they're on campus or doing a school activity, they're speaking Hawaiian exclusively. And so my kids had to deal with that. And so that was really eye-opening for them, that, you know, that they were there watching this language that had nearly become extinct be reclaimed by the kids to whom it belongs.
Fantastic. There's actually so many parallels between our emerging partnership with the Mayahuna in Peru and the work that you're doing. While we're not planting trees, because that's not a primary issue right now in our part of the where we're working, but that, you know, the dying language, the traditional ecological knowledge, the intergenerational collaborations, there's just so many parallels. So thank you so much. This was a delight. Other questions or comments?
I just loved your presentation. What am I? I'm a retired school teacher. I taught for 35 years, and a good amount of that time was either in a K-12 school or a middle school. So you're teaching the way I taught, and I just love that whole concept of integrating everything and working with the different ages working together. So it's great, and I loved your presentation. Thanks.
Thank you.
So Alex, the carbon calculators that you used, can we provide those links as well? I know they're in your slide somewhere, but I think we should provide a series of links for that sort of thing, as well as the links that you provided on the last slide.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can tell you, we use the Nature Conservancy carbon calculator a lot although Berkeley also has quite a nice one too.
Mhm.
And, you know, I mean, they're all approximations really, because there's lots of assumptions that go in there. But for the purposes of what we're doing, it's fine. You know, you don't need to know to the gram how much carbon, you know, is being sequestered. You need to have an estimate, you know, and that helps you understand the impact of your actions and which things you might want to address first.
Well, I think our heads are all exploding with all the ideas that you've given us and the ties to what we're doing in Peru, even though it's such a, you know, different place and different ecosystems. The concepts are so overlapping. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I enjoyed the opportunity to share this.
Well, it was wonderful. And I'm going to call out Mike Hill and Seth Buddy because they've been working on some climate conversations with us and looking at our climate action plan, and then also ecosystem services for the forest that the Mayahuna are protecting. And they're going to be joining us in the Amazon next summer with some students. And I was texting Mike while you were talking, and I said, I really swear did not ask Alex to create this presentation just for you, Mike, but it was perfect. So yeah, just so much good stuff to think about, and really, really appreciate it. And we will share it widely and use this for a lot of follow-up with other teachers that weren't able to be on tonight. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And please reach out. I'd love to talk to anybody. If anybody wants to follow up or ask other questions, you should be able to get in touch with me.
Yeah, I'll make sure everybody's got your contact information, and we'll send out a link to the video, and then Nancy and I'll compile some resources to go along with this. So any last final comments or questions, or we'll let Alex go. She's on campus tonight and has got to get back home for dinner.
Oh, well, I just want to say hi, Seth. We live 30 miles apart and we have not hooked up yet, but we will.
One day.
One day. I got to give you those books. Yeah. Before
Thanks
you
so
go
much. This was awesome. I love it. Really fantastic. Thank you so much.
It's great.
Well, I hope you all can, I hope you all run out and plant some trees.
Well, absolutely. And again, thank you, Alex. Everybody have a good year end to the school year. Hopefully the last few weeks will be peaceful and quiet. Ha!
Yeah.
But maybe your vacation will be. So more to come in January. We'll get the next event. It's scheduled with Randy Morgan, Leafcutter Ants, the first Thursday in January, but I'll get that link out to everybody too. So again, thank you, Alex, so much.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful way to end our year on a hopeful note, and just really great. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Alex.
Yes.
All right. See everybody soon.
Thanks.
Bye all.